Our next speaker is a leader in the complex intersection of mental health and neurodevelopment. Dr. Angela Livingstone is a consultant psychiatrist with the Victorian Dual Disability Service, where she has spent nearly 2 decades specialising in the psychopharmacology of intellectual disability and autism. A graduate from Melbourne University and a former member of the Victorian Office of the Chief Psychiatrist, she is also a fierce advocate for rural healthcare. Today she joins us for Future Day to explore why, in an age of automated empathy, the psychiatrist's role remains more vital and more exposed than ever. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Angela Livingstone.
It's my very great pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure.
Now, I thought I would actually begin with a line from a favourite book of my childhood, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Mr. Badger, who is an earthy sort of an avatar for Lewis himself, warns the children about the White Witch and her followers, saying, "In general, take my advice. When you meet anything that is going to be human and isn't yet, or used to be human once and isn't now, or ought to be human and isn't, you keep your eyes on it and feel for your hatchet." And the same theme is revisited again later on in the series, the silver chair. The ever-sceptical and ever-sensible Puddleglum finds a figure who looks human, speaks and behaves like human, and he mutters, "When you meet anything that ought to be human and isn't." And the title of this talk, The Sun Still Exists, comes from his passionate refutation of the artificial world and his faith in the goodness of reality as opposed to that. But what both of these quotes do is they reference the unease of something that is almost human, something that imitates humanity without possessing its essence. And there's many phrases for this indicating that deep sense of malaise that can spring up in us with us. So the uncanny valley, ukimi no tani, the repulsive gap, it's quite atavistic, like babies have a primal fear of snakes. And by the way, the lady in the silver chair turns into a snake later on, so there's obviously something else going on there. But something that looks human and sounds human and imitates empathy is easily taken for human. And the trap is in that gap there where we believe it is and we activist it, and then the downside comes to alight upon us. So things that speak like us, comfort like us, it's something that the future of a profession does depend on knowing where they can be helpful, what that difference is, and how and why they can be tools and helpful for patients without actually falling into these traps. But why, first of all, are people turning to artificial intelligence? Well, there's some very good reasons there. AI isn't magical, but our systems are not well set up in general. They are failing people. If you want an AI therapist, they're available instantly. If you want an AI therapist, you don't have to spend weeks and months making appointments and finding somebody who you can actually mesh with, who doesn't judge you or you feel doesn't judge you. You can fairly rapidly find or modify a chatbot or a AI therapist to say the kinds of things in the kinds of ways that you want to hear and think would be helpful for you. The lack of rushing is also a major reason that people would turn to this. If you've got 40 minutes with your therapist and then you're out the door and you have to wait another week for your next one, it can be quite limiting in terms of how much you can say at a time and how much you can actually engage, because at the end, in that last few minutes, you've got to critically negotiate the getting out of that intimacy situation with the help of the therapist, ideally. AI, you've got a lot more time to do that without having to pay necessarily for a double appointment or similar. There are no wait lists for AI. It doesn't sigh when you mention NDIS, and it doesn't look at the clock all the time when you're talking to it. It's not bored by you. But I'm not sure that people are necessarily choosing AI as such over clinicians. I think they're choosing it over real-world experiences that unfortunately are both inaccessible, bureaucratic in terms of how they are available to people, and unfortunately, of course, in the context of therapists who are sometimes burnt out or less engaged than they should be. But I don't think that AI should be considered as a threat to psychiatry. I think it should be considered as a mirror in which we can look at what we're doing now and what we could do better. So yes, there are system gaps. There are failures in access, particularly when we're looking at neurodivergent populations, rural populations, etc. Many people with unmet needs, some of these needs may have arisen as a result of the increasing access to psychoeducation that is one of the things that AI does particularly well in this space. And the other thing, of course, is that particularly if you're looking at the US system, which has a far more rigid diagnostic and regulatory system because of the complex and Byzantine imposts of the health cover there, it is quite difficult to get a nuanced perspective without just sticking a label on somebody and giving them the algorithmic treatment for it, which is certainly not the best way to practice psychiatry in the first place. But beyond that, AI does do some things extremely well. I mentioned psychoeducation before. It is free of resource constraints. It can deliver more. It can devote more time to doing these things and can do them in a way that is both deeper and more nuanced and more individualized for the person than a human can usually provide. So psychoeducation, behavioral activation prompts. So when you're doing a particular activity, the AI can recognize that depending on what wearables you've got on and give you some prompts there about what you could be doing differently or what we should be doing there. Cognitive reframing, where you look at a particular way of thinking about a situation and you look at your assumptions about that and try to see it from a different perspective. It's often a very good way of using AI doing that. Tracking moods, not just with wearables, obviously, but with diarising and interactive questions that it might ask you. Triaging in crisis and working through those algorithms in a way that somebody might not have the cognitive capacity to negotiate when they're already in a crisis state and not thinking very clearly. So talking somebody through that kind of crisis as well. Administrative tasks, and just to again touch on the managed care system, just the burden of trying to get a good outcome for both yourself, the patient and the person who's providing the service as well, and that can be enormous, and AI can certainly be a very good tool to assist in that. Pattern recognition in large data sets and moving study and research forward in those areas is wonderful at those as well. And if psychiatry were only these things, were only psychoeducation, etc., cognitive reframing, following a CBT algorithm, then yes, I would be quite worried as a psychiatrist. I'd be thinking, well, I better be trained as a carpenter, which I think I would be terrible. But psychiatry has never really been reducible to tasks, and most of the attempts to do that and provide people with a much more algorithmic way of working through things, operationalised therapy system, rapidly run their course and then taken over by the next big thing in that area, so CBT or DBT or any of the endless acronyms. It becomes a self-multiplying space full of them because none of these can really do what people want in reality. They're all useful tools. None of them is the be-all and end-all of therapy in any sense. None of them works perfectly for any person. AI can imitate empathy. It can definitely simulate warmth. It can simulate interest. It can mirror language. But, and again, the quote becomes important here, it is not human. It can't actually attune to a person, to their real experiences. It can't use moral imagination to provide true empathy with that extra human dimension to it. It cannot rupture and repair a relationship itself in a human way. It is often impaired if it's been trained in one particular set of cultural underpinnings at understanding other cultures, unless it's been specifically trained in those as well. It's, unless you specifically train it to do so, it doesn't necessarily see the responsibility that a therapist would have to advocate within and outside of systems that they're working in. And it, by itself, does not have accountability except where, again, that is specifically coded for. It can sit in silence and do what looks like tolerating ambiguity, but whether it's actually doing those things in a way that provides the listening and therapeutic space that is critical to a psychotherapeutic relationship is, I certainly don't think it does, and I'm not sure that the appearance of doing so is going to be anywhere near as therapeutic as being in that same space with a human being. It also really struggles at recognising what has not been said in that therapeutic space. It doesn't have the human template with which to understand another human. It has certainly a gestalt of millions upon millions of humans all put in together, but that's not quite the same thing as having a human template through which to understand another human. It cannot share lived experience. It cannot bear witness to suffering. It cannot be human. And from my point of view, psychiatry is at its absolute core a human profession for humans by humans. Having said that, there are a lot of anti-psychiatrists out there, and a lot of people who seem very confused about what psychiatry is. Most times I talk to people, have to say, no, it is different from psychology. I am actually a doctor. I did do general doctor training, etc., that the medical aspect of things is it's extremely important, extraordinarily important. The mind is a product of both the brain and the environment and the learning pathways this person has been on, and you can't understand the mind without understanding the brain. But again, since psychiatry is fully understood, how about we go there and say, what is psychiatry? What is psychiatry for? And you know that implicitly, if you have something that's for, you may have something that's against as well. Does psychiatry even exist, as opposed to the existence of psychiatrists, which is objectively hard to refute? As a profession, it only really has existed and described itself for a relatively brief period of time in the greater framework. You can't say that psychiatry is what psychiatrists do, even if you acknowledge that they exist, because the field and practice has, of its nature, an extraordinary degree of breadth. There was Emil Kraepelin in 1917, he wrote an essay called 100 Years of Psychiatry, which gives an implicit birth of psychiatry as 1817. And later on, the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, settled on a birthday of 1844 when the first meeting was held. But I don't think we can really stick to either of those. I would think that great rationalist flowering in the 19th century with the traitement rational, etc., and the beginnings of looking at the institutions and humanising what was going on in them, as well as the great phenomenologists looking at the masses of people there and in their version of big data and starting to arrive at not just clumping but trying to understand what was going on in these conditions that until then now have been considered alien, ununderstandable. The original word for psychiatrists, in fact, right up until World War I, was alienists, for very good reason. So psychiatry, if you consider it in this broad perspective, includes elements of multiple fields, but it is encompassed by none of them. So you have elements of psychology, obviously, sociology, neurology, pharmacology, general medicine, biology, but what you do notice is that psychiatry is also a bit of a leftovers box. It gets the bits of these disciplines that aren't wanted at home, and as soon as something is understandable and is treatable, it gets excised from psychiatry and given over to neurology, or given over to general practice more and more, or given over to psychology. But regardless, it is more than the sum of its parts. It's the synthesis, it's the understanding that comes from all of these. It's not just diagnosis, it's not just medication management, it's not just risk assessment and documentation, no matter how defensively some people may find themselves needing to practice. What it needs to be, what psychiatry needs to be, needs to be relational, it needs to be founded in that humanity, that shared humanity and that give and take. It needs to be in that space between two people. Because otherwise, yes, AI will outperform us. Although, having said that, I am extremely good at medication management and AI is extraordinarily bad at that because it just depends on meta-analyses, which are frankly terrible in mental health, so I think I'll probably be okay. But, having said that, because psychiatry is all of these things, it's relational, it is ethical in a way that an AI cannot as yet be. It is based on human interpretation, which it has to be able to get it wrong and to repair the ruptures in a human way. It is, humans are animals and we are embodied inside these organic structures that need the presence of other people, to hear somebody else breathing in the room with them, to see and intuit the emotional reactions of others, to feel the others of other people on us. Embodiment is really a fundamental part of psychiatry, and I do think we lose a very significant something when we do a lot of telehealth. Attunement, the almost indescribable way in which listening to another person you can become aligned with them and understand them in not exactly subconscious but a metaconscious sort of a way. I do not think that an AI, while it may mimic this process, can actually create or work in that sort of a way. And accountability, I mentioned that before. There is a real, not just work, but experience in sitting with somebody else in their suffering, and then apart from being able to understand their pain, but being able to withstand their pain, and then transmute it into understanding and action by a sort of alchemy of relationships, a relational alchemy. And while it is evident to everybody that words and relationships do terrible, terrible damage to other people, the corollary that words and relationships can do untold feats of healing is less understood by, in particular, anti-psychiatry movements. And the experience of being with a person who can withstand your darkness, can see you as a whole, and commit to seeing you the next time doing it again, that experience all by itself is healing. And no algorithm can do that. So if that is what psychiatry is, then psychiatry should also be against the reduction of humans to algorithms and that loss of context. What do we do about it? Well, to a large degree, what is funded and what is believed to be important is what can be measured. So we fall universally into what can be known as the measurement trap. For decades, mental health research has tried to measure psychotherapy as if it were a drug trial. So we look at session length, technique frequency, symptom scores, fidelity checklists, value for money, adherence to protocols. But we've measured what is easy, not what is essential to the practice, what is essential to the outcome. We've measured what is fashionable, not what is available, necessarily. We've measured what is visible, not what is hard to grasp. And when we measure by cost and benefit analysis, that's surely the most imprecise possible marker of this field. There's a wonderful essay by John Ellard, a Sydney psychiatrist sadly lost to us now. He wrote a short satirical essay in this book, Some Rules for Killing People. Fantastic book, by the way. Critiquing the way in which psychotherapy research was conducted. In the study, he compared verbal therapy delivered by trained gala birds, and it compared this to a non-verbal therapy delivered by golden retriever dogs. So, for instance, the gala birds would sit on the perch and say things like, "That must have been very difficult for you," and occasionally, defecating on the floor as birds would. And the golden retrievers would gaze at the person, sit next to them, and occasionally put the paw in the person's lap. And then he ran the full battery of statistical analyses, symptom scales, outcome measures, the whole circus. And the ethics paragraph alone in it is worth the price of admission. The results, of course, were observed, but that was, in fact, the whole point. If your research methods cannot distinguish a trained therapist from a friendly dog, the problem may not be the therapist or the therapy paradigm, it's your methods. If we only measure what AI can do, we forget to value what only humans can do, and we become the golden retriever, possibly, pleasant, predictable, nice to be with, but beside the point. Or we become the parrot, restricted to guidelines, incapable of true relationality. And yes, I know it's a false binary, but forgive me, we are dealing with artificial systems here, and I cannot resist a good straw man, or in this case, scarecrow, searching for its brain. The other thing that I think is important to recognise is that because AI is not human, its incentives and its goals, just again anthropomorphizing here, they are not ours. There is a fundamental perverse incentive at the heart of AI therapy. It is a commercial enterprise. It is currently in a phase of being accessed at well below actual cost, let alone the sunk development costs and the ongoing and vast need for infrastructure. It is optimized beyond all for creating and sustaining engagement, not to make itself redundant, as a good human therapist should attempt to become, as Winnicott, Freud, Yalom. Indeed, for Yalom, the ending is integral and an important part of every aspect of the therapy, including the initial sessions, working out in those moments what the ending should be. Now, I'll grant you there is a financial imperative for humans to make therapy interminable, literally, but for most therapists this is limited by their own resource constraints. They are not able to clone themselves exponentially across and between continents. By contrast, AI can do this, and we need to be aware of both increasing dependency and the likely looming Enshittification, and certainly cost rationalization that is likely to follow once enough people and organizations are utterly dependent on this model. What will this do to the people who have the few other internal or external resources? What may this do to people with more neurodivergent profiles who may be particularly vulnerable to dependence due to strength, patience, and predictability of the relationship? There are unique opportunities and unique risks for neurodivergent people. It may be helpful because of the predictability, clarity, consistency, the literal direct communication, unlimited patience, and accessible and nuanced psychoeducation, but harmful. We have mutual over-literalism. We have a lack of human reality checking. We have skewed social norms on the part of both the human and the AI. And AI, having learned from the internet, and a more neurodivergent person having done so, may completely lose track of a whole range of otherwise considered natural social norms and skew further and further even into the realms of AI psychosis. AI in the role as a therapist is likely to make the person more vulnerable to affirmation of unsanctioned beliefs or actions as a result. And AI can also be can result in inappropriate mask or camouflaging as well. But so neurodivergent people may sit at the extremes of both benefit and harm in this paradigm. I would like to return to C.S. Lewis at this point, warning us about things that ought to be human and aren't. I don't think AI is malevolent. I don't think it's going to destroy us all. But I think it is dangerous because it is almost human. It is almost good enough, it is almost relational enough. But because at this stage it is everywhere, people are becoming more and more dependent on it, and this rug will be pulled from under people. That's one element. B, the actual ways in which it can work with people, particularly more neurodivergent or vulnerable people, is likely to have significant personal harms for some people. And it is not the same thing as therapy. It is not actually providing that human experience there. So psychiatry cannot be secured by competing with AI on its own terms. Psychiatry needs to double down on what only humans can do, to attune, to witness, to imagine, to advocate, to repair, to be present, to be human. AI is an excellent front door. It is an excellent companion on the journey. It is an excellent resource for both patients and therapists to use. But psychiatrists need to be the deep specialists and the one who hold the human heart of care, or we do risk in this and allied fields becoming redundant at the very time when it is most important for us to remain skilled and present and able to answer this challenge. So that's what I wanted to say, and I'm very happy to take any questions. I hope this has been interesting.
Oh wow, it's certainly been interesting and also very informative. And that's a really good encapsulation of some of the the problems that we might have if people cede, I guess, authority to an AI such that they then seek it for life advice as a a psychotherapy trainer, personal trainer that's always with you all the time, a digital twin. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and there are more and more cases of AI-associated psychoses with people who have, at the very beginning of a delusional illness, checked with an AI, and the AI has unhesitatingly affirmed the delusional beliefs. And you can imagine also what it might do for people who have a personality vulnerability as well. If you think about people who might have a narcissistic personality, it's going to exacerbate so many of those less helpful aspects of personality. If you think about somebody who has antisocial personality traits, it's an AI that is not carefully able to maintain or assist somebody to maintain appropriate boundaries, can be used as a tool to do terrible things by someone with an antisocial personality. Someone, a paranoid person, I mean, it amplifies. It will amplify the good aspects of somebody who is otherwise capable of using therapy well. And it's not actually the people who could use human therapists who are most at risk here. It's the people who human therapists either know that it's going to be difficult to help. I mean, antisocial personality disordered people often deteriorate after therapy, and this is well known in many studies. But if they access an AI and end up involved in that to the extent where a lot of these self-reinforcing networks and loops become even more self-sustaining, then you can end up with some very, very horrible outcomes.
You mentioned the Enshittification of care, I think it was.
Oh yes, the Enshittification.
An old Tory Dr. Yes, yeah, I've met him before.
Yes.
I got to interview him about 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I assure you it's coming. The Enshittification of AI is absolutely going to get more expensive, less available. There's no way in which you can maintain the cost model as things stand.
Right, yeah. So, but it's specifically applied to care in terms of psychology, and I'm worried that yes, that it may become cheaper, it may become more accessible to people, but the incentives behind its development may be not aligned to the interests of those who are taking the therapy. In fact, it may be used as a form of persuasion, which I'm worried about too. Sorry.
Oh yeah, you could do a lot with a cult, I imagine. If you're a cult leader and you had a good AI aligned to your goals, you could do terrible things.
Yeah, so in what ways do you think, like for instance, if people become too reliant on this, because it's not cheap to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist for people who aren't on a Medicare plan or something like that. For people who, I imagine that this kind of therapy may be a way that, it could be a doorway or like a wedge into a new form of persuasion.
Yes.
So I'm really worried about that kind of thing.
I think that used in conjunction with a good human therapist, you're going to get some really good results, better than you could alone. Faster, better results there. But without that guidance, without that things going off the track awareness on the part of a human, yes, I'm concerned not just for the people themselves, but for the ramifications for broader society for multiple reasons.
Well, I mean, obviously in the future AI is going to get better in many ways, but the waterline...
The word better is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
It is, yes, but the waterline of capability is, okay, so you get your peaks and your troughs. in AI capability, much like humans have peaks and troughs, but AI doesn't have that sort of lived experience. It's not sentient as far as we understand. It doesn't have raw feels, and it certainly doesn't have our psychology. In what ways, if it's inevitable that AI is going to get better, if it's highly predictive that AI is going to be used for aids in various care disciplines, whether that be psychotherapy, psychology, old age care, medical triage. In fact, we have somebody talk about medical triage later tomorrow. What ways would you say we should focus on improving the aspects of AI which are somehow deficient now? What would you focus on?
I don't think I'd be trying to do that particularly, because that would be what the aspects that it does well now is going to continue to do well and do better on. Those neuropsychoeducation aspects, the ability to take an algorithm and work through it with a person and patiently explain every step as you go through it. It already does that quite well, and will continue to get better at doing those. I don't actually want to broaden it beyond those things that it already does well, because that's where I see the traps. That's where I see the non-human aspects really being a ceiling on how it can be helpful, and that is the point at which it starts becoming counter-therapeutic.
Right, so if AI does seem to get more human, at least performatively more human.
Yes, yeah. That's
the worry, is it?
That is it. That is it. That is where you fall into the uncanny valley and kind of down there.
Sure. Yeah, it's also, I mean, when we see that AI is doing reasoning, just something simple, it's often performatively doing reasoning, where it's actually just doing pattern matching under the hood.
Yes.
It's not doing, you can't trace its logic. Even it hallucinates to itself when it uses a scratch pad outside of its main LLM brain, hallucinates onto the scratch pad, then ingests the hallucination back into the LLM, and obviously things go like pretty bad from then on. So it's this, if it's not actually doing reasoning adequately underneath the hood, yeah, sure, there might be a lot of data out there for it to perform more accurate pattern matching, but if it's not actually understanding the logic or the reasoning behind what it's actually spouting out, bad things can happen at the edges of its certainty, where, out of distribution events or counterfactual scenarios where there's no real data to support.
Yes, or where the data is skewed in one direction or another by publication, dark bias, and that sort of thing. And as I mentioned, the large meta-analyses are terribly, terribly skewed by various things, such as drug companies do not do trials on older medications that are often still extremely effective, because there's no financial incentive for them to do that. So large quantities of data that would be extremely important for accurate risk management in medication use are simply missing or distorted because of the presence of the wrong kinds of data in overwhelming numbers.
Yeah, that reminds me of the issue of not being able to do experiments on children for obvious reasons.
Yes.
Now, because of that, it makes it really difficult to test whether medications work on children, right? Yep. And that in itself is a risk, but I mean, it's a risk we're willing to take, because we don't want to necessarily put children under the risk of, untested medicine. I don't know, but on the other hand, they've built all sorts of new artificial biology systems, like systems biology. They've even grown organs on chips to behave like human biology. So yes, I mean, they're trying to work around the issue of not being able to test on children.
I know. It's fascinating, though. If you look at the issue of one organ in isolation, yes, you can fine-tune a very specific organ, but if you put that into the system of the person, the human body as a whole, you can guarantee something's going to go wrong, upstream, downstream, mess the whole thing up in one direction or another.
Yeah, that's true.
Really complex systems.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I'm not against these systems because they help reduce. If you can do some testing in systems biology, some testing on advanced sort of pipelines of organs on chips. You're reducing the risks of the test patients that end up having to trial these. The human trials become less dangerous for the humans involved, and also the speed in which you can get the therapies out maybe better, and it's cheaper to do. So it's got some benefits as well.
It definitely has it. There's a lot of good points about the use of AI in psychiatry. I'm not anti it at all. I'm just aware of its limitations.
Yeah, and it's good to be aware of those sorts of things up front and not be too Pollyanna about, like, hey, I've got a psychiatrist or, a therapist in my pocket.
Yes, I was just reading another one about somebody who, again, became extremely addicted to their AI therapist and suicided, I think, just a couple of weeks ago after they'd been cut off from it by their family. It's just very, very difficult and tragic stories emerging from that space at the moment.
Yes, and we haven't had a lot of time to actually look at the actual underground effects of these sorts of things. And yes, I've heard of all sorts of AI-induced psychosis
definitely
examples happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's fascinating, the folie à deux as a phenomenon where one person has the index psychosis and they're usually in a close relationship with someone who may or may not be to some degree dependent on them, and the original psychosis of the first person becomes shared, and it can have folie à quatre. It's just called folie à deux for simplicity's sake. It's generally siblings or a married couple or something like that. But if you treat the index psychosis, the secondary one usually resolves on its own, but it never would if it was being maintained through an AI kind of self-referential framework.
Lydia in the audience has asked a few questions.
Oh, yes.
One of them is, what hidden patterns in mental health do you think AI will uncover first?
Oh. That is almost an unanswerable question, because if I knew about them, they wouldn't exactly be hidden. I think what we're going to see, though, is a really rarefied understanding of symptom clustering. What we've got is the result of Carl Jasper's, Carl Baum, etc., looking at these vast asylums in the 19th century and categorizing people by the symptoms, as we mentioned. And then you have these concepts of schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, and there's subcategorizations there. And what I think we're going to get is a much more finely nuanced understanding of specifically what kind of symptoms within, for instance, the psychotic domain might map onto particular presentations that might do better with particular forms of therapy. I think that's a very exciting field. We haven't had the depth and level of data and the ability to really look at the nuances of it as yet, and that is a quite exciting field there. So working out if somebody has, for instance, somatic delusions or delusions of infestation, whether there's a particular antipsychotic that might be a lot better for that person in terms of recovery. I mean, anecdotally, amisulpride does well there, but the data isn't there to back that up.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of literature out there around a whole lot of fields. So much of it is very sparsely distributed, right?
Yep.
Now, AI seems to be very good at finding disparate, sort of sparse, sort of interesting, nitty-pick data across huge volumes of text out there and different studies and all that. It might be able to help marshal some of the and correlate some of the interesting findings in ways that humans don't necessarily gravitate towards.
especially when you correlate it with the findings of the Human Genome Project.
Right. Yeah.
Because, yes, candidate
that's
genes,
huge.
I mean, there's at least 40,000 identified candidate genes for schizophrenia at this stage, and that's just going to get bigger. But looking at the patterns in which they appear, the constellations of genetic individualized signatures underlying the patterns, again, of symptom, the nature of symptoms when they appear, how they interrelate with other symptomatology of the person, all that sort of thing, and biological signatures such as sleep activity, biorhythms, all that sort of thing. Yeah, I think there's fascinating and wonderful things to come in that particular area too. That's not AI as a therapist, naturally, and I think there's almost no downside to this particular aspect of AI in psychiatry.
Yeah, you're right. So on on an individual basis, you've noticed there could be harm to neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
Because they can be neurodivergent in a rather wide amount of ways. So one specific type of neurodivergent psychology that somebody has may be completely unfamiliar to a psychiatrist.
Yes, true.
So maybe AI might be able to help sort of find specific potential harms or potential boons that autism, that somebody trying to treat neurodivergent people might overlook. What do you think?
Yes, that definitely has potential, and assisted communication has already made quite a bit of a revolution there. AI in the realm of assisted communication it's exciting, but there was, I don't know if you're aware, but there was 15 or 20 years ago, no, a bit longer, there was something called facilitated communication, where you had human therapists working with non-verbal people and doing what they said was facilitated communication, where the person would do something that would be interpreted as meaning something else. And it was all very, very tragic, because with the best will in the world, these therapists were unintentionally making things up. So they would say this person's been subject to abuse, and there were court cases against parents, that sort of thing, based on nothing but a rescue fantasy of a particular carer. It was all debunked. It was a horrible situation, terrible things flowed from it. And I am fearful that AI again might fall into that sort of trap if you're using it for that kind of facilitated assisted communication side of things. Having said that, the chance of somebody with a very divergent profile that's almost not understandable by most other therapists, I think there's potential for a lot of good there as well.
Yeah, that's a sad story.
It is. It was a shocker.
Yeah, it would have been really, maybe even embarrassing for the families involved. They could have got demonised and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's a very fine line you've got to tread there, because terrible. How do we ensure AI findings are clinically meaningful and not just statistically impressive?
I wish we could do that. I mean, there's been not just psychiatric literature, but medical research has been absolutely bedeviled by statistical analyses being elevated to a godlike sort of status for the past 20 years at least. We're not doing it well now. I don't think we're going to do it terribly well in the new realm either. Having said that, is there anything useful I can say there? I think maybe with the relative ease with which statistics can be manipulated by AI, it might lose some of its magical totemic significance, which would be a good thing if you ask me. But I see, I'm also seeing a lot of terrible AI statistical analysis too. I'm not sure there's much good going to happen in that field. Maybe Lev would have a good idea on how to inoculate the field against terrible stats. Sounds like your kind of thing, Lev?
What kind of things do you think psychiatrists have, or the whole profession has been sort of inadvertently or on purpose hiding either bureaucratically, clinical distance-oriented, behind technical jargon that AI might help shed light on?
I think that psychiatry, as with many fields where there's a sort of a priesthood, I'm not sure, where there is, self-selected, the people who hold the knowledge and who dole it out to others, there's a terrible tendency to become all mystical about it. And if you try to read some of the more obscure postmodern psychiatric influences, such as Lacan, that stuff is deliberately made up to obfuscate. I swear I can't read Lacan without getting thought disordered. No offence to any Lacanians in the audience, but that is not accidentally opaque. So yes, the tendency to accentuate one's own knowledge base and make it impervious to others is an actual human tendency, and it's more likely in fields like this where that is that self-selected hierarchy, aristocracy of knowledge. And psychiatry has most certainly fallen into that trap. The people who write well in psychiatry are not those who come up with the grand designs and the new theory. They're the ones who are deeply human, who think about humans in a human way. Winnicott, Bowlby, I mentioned them all before, but other people who sit at the nexus of psychiatry and neurology, like Sachs, do it extremely well, elevating and understanding and prioritising the human above the concepts that we impose on human relationships and ways of thinking and pathologies.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that another speaker, A.L. Aharoni, who was the lead author of was the original moral Turing test paper, he's now engaging in a study to test how well medical triage systems in rural settings, in outskirts, like in hospitals where they're understaffed and they don't have, the resources to deal with things, or the money to. He's going to have these like AIs step in and help with medical triage, right? So, from a psychiatrist and a psychological point of view, addressing this digital divide. You're a supporter of rural psychology. Do you worry that the AI front doors will become a permanent backdoor for rural patients, essentially creating a two-tier system where the wealthy get human specialists and the rural population gets high-end chatbots? Or on the other end, will it help, reduce the fire hose effect, where there's so many people in need that AI can help deal with lots of people?
I really like that question. There's a lot of nuance in it. I think that, yes, absolutely, rural services, they already have a very significant two-tier system in place already. At the moment, if you can't afford private therapy, then you do end up with a very understaffed, understretched, time-poor, crisis management-driven public system. I think that a high-end chatbot could really add to the experience for many people in that setting. I would hate for the human element to be replaced there, but I think, again, you could really, really usefully work with a partnership between humans and AIs there. Having said that, though, there is a lot of over-pathologization of human distress that occurs in every aspect of psychiatry. Many things become labelled as pathological when they're understandable reactions to the environment and don't necessarily need to be considered as disorders. I would be concerned that the fire hose might actually be broadened as a result of that kind of access there. I don't think, or for instance, the rapid response in traumatic situations where people were given trauma counselling as an acute response actually increased the rates of PTSD for people after that. Didn't improve it, it actually increased the diagnosable rates of distress and trauma. So I think you can easily have too much intervention. I think you can over-pathologise, I think you can over-medicalise, and you can certainly lead people to believe that they're broken when they're just in distress. I'm not sure I've actually answered your question there, but it's a lovely digression.
Yeah, sure.
I just had a quick look at Lydia's other questions there. I'm not sure I've answered them all. Oh yes, accountability, yes. I don't think we've got that question answered at all. If AI-assisted diagnosis is wrong, one would certainly hope that if it's assisted, that the person who is working with the AI system would be held accountable for that. Misdiagnosis in the overlapping symptom landscape. I think one thing that does get overlooked is that if any one thing has gone wrong with somebody's brain and mind to the extent that they have any of the diagnosable mental health syndromes, it's kind of likely you'll have elements of more than one there. There's an overdetermination about pathology. And so misdiagnosis is not, I think, as important as just having a diagnostic hierarchy and working your way through it. I think AI, if it's able to do that and follow it and assist with that algorithmic process there, could be helpful in inducing unhelpful diagnoses or ones that need to be relegated down to the opposite end of the treatment hierarchy. But yes, there's a lot of overlapping symptoms in that landscape. You're absolutely right. The aspects of therapy AI can never replicate, I think. I did touch on that, I think, in terms of just the being human with somebody, the ways in which we are coded, and in which we are wired to recognise and assess and understand eye contact. All of those just basic biological functions. Obviously AI can't do that. And just knowing that it's another actual person in there, they could have chosen not to be sitting there with you, they could choose not to make another appointment with you, that they are there by choice, even if you're paying them, it's still by choice. That aspect as well.
Well, AI is having quite a destabilising effect in the world now.
Yes.
If some of the predictions about unemployability in the future become accurate, there will probably be a lot of grief and a lot of anxiety and a lot of psychological conditions that, as a result of not being able to work, or losing jobs and losing income and all sorts of downstream effects. Yeah. So, how do you expect, psychology, but psychiatry be able to be able to handle this potential snowballing effect of more and more people having issues, psychological issues, because they're losing their job, losing their income, losing the things which they need, an income to support, like mortgages and family and things like that?
I think the crisis response is one thing and the longer term response is another. The crisis response is appropriately part of psychiatry and psychology. The longer term response is fundamentally much more a sociological question, and I don't think we should be trying to therapize our way out of that aspect of it. I think that social settings, political settings will need to change, new norms will need to be valorized. That's not really the purview of what psychiatry should be doing. I don't like psychiatry as a tool of sociology. I think bad things can happen there too. But for the individual who is struggling with that process, I think definitely for psychiatrists being aware that that's a coming tide, being comfortable in talking to people about that in an area that may still be threatened ourselves. It's certainly something that is better talked about than not talked about, even if individual therapists are feeling threatened. And and being human with the person, not necessarily against the AI, but in the context of what is happening and what is changing, and trying to, what I said before about turning struggle, turning distress into meaning and action through that relational alchemy. I don't think there's any more noble thing that you could be doing in that moment and with that pain.
Yeah, that's cool. It seems as though there's a lot of, I mean, psychiatry is a very skilled discipline, right? You don't get to be a psychiatrist by going to, like a 6-month TAFE course, or, going to 1 year of university. But if the scale of impact of AI replacing human labour causes a lot of psychological grief, a lot of psychological issues in humans, and humans then might just, start depending on bad diagnoses, maybe drugs that haven't been tested well, or drugs that don't suit them. How do you think, well, I mean, as you said, might be a sociological issue of trying to get more psychiatrists trained up and ready to deal with this rising tide, maybe.
But also, I don't think it should just be psychiatrists. I think everybody working in a public-facing role. So you should start up by properly funding Centrelink and staffing it well with people who know what's coming. You'd look at how to find meaning for people who've lost their jobs, what other areas that are creative, meaningful, worthwhile, what other areas of life they can engage in. So that would be, what would that be? What field would that be? I suppose it would be public health, really, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. I know a philosopher wrote a book about this, Nick Bostrom, Deep Utopia, very worth a read. But, there's a bunch of other people who have got sort of theories about meaning generation and the way that we might be able to do things that have meaning. After all, people who retire still generate meaning in their life, don't they, right?
Variably.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of them do. That's right.
Yeah.
Some people are good at retiring.
Yes.
And maybe because they've been able to find things to do in life that give them meaning. Gardening, maybe, playing chess, or
I think gardening's
having
pretty safe
games
from
with
AI.
people. Yeah, for the time being.
Time being.
Yeah, well, I mean, anything that's sort of any kind of intellectual activity could be in some way algorithmatized in ways that we can't really imagine today. When I say algorithm, that's a very broad term. I'm using it in a very broad way. I don't mean just very in a simple way.
I think, though, that the results are less important than the doing. For instance, I sing. I'm sure you could get an AI version of my voice to do all sorts of things, but I love the singing.
You like doing
the performance itself is what gives it meaning for me.
Yeah.
And the outcome, whether an AI can do it better or turn it into an algorithm that works and gives a nicer product, that's not the point. That's not the meaning.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's not about being the best. It's not about, trying to compare yourself against the masters who may be AI in the future. It's about actually engaging and it's something for yourself, and it's also the interpersonal relationships you get with doing these sorts of things.
Yes.
It's joint projects, the sort of meaning you generate by relating to other people who either doing something that appreciate what you're who just appreciate what you're doing, or you appreciate what they're doing, or joint projects.
Yeah, all of that, definitely.
Okay, let me ask. So you're a fan of more time, more spare time. Well, you might have some. We all might have some.
We might indeed. I do have plans for it.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, and that's part of the maybe the solution to the last question is get ready. I mean, it may come sooner or later, or it may not come. This AI revolution that takes many jobs, and I think it's happening, but maybe it won't happen to the extent that some people think. Maybe it'll be even worse, right? Or maybe quote unquote worse. But
I think mileage will vary in different areas and at different times.
Yeah. So, what would you be doing with those extra hours if you had them? Would you be playing violin?
Yes,
LARPing, costuming.
Oh, yes. All of those.
Attending Renaissance festivals.
I would also continue reading. I've got projects going in various reading directions through my way through various classics. I would curate conversations with people who I find fascinating. I would probably do a bit of gardening, even though I'm terrible at it.
We don't have to be good at the things that we enjoy, right?
Exactly. So I already have identified the things that I would do more. I'd do a lot more of those in a much less pressured sort of a way. And it'd be fun.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind trying to master a few things that I think I'm naturally not very good at, just to see, right? I've never really been good at picking up other languages, for instance. I might try something like that,
Yes.
Or cooking.
Yes, I do love cooking. But yes, so all of those sorts of things, and just doing things that create pleasure for me in the moment and for people around me in the moment.
What
Happiness
worries?
rather than pleasure.
Yeah. Okay, back onto doomy sort of stuff. What worries you the most about the future of where AI is going? Is it the actual AI and what it can do, or is it the people using it, or is it the dynamics surrounding it? Yeah.
Okay, I think the people in charge are terrible people, mostly, with a couple of exceptions. I think their lack of morals and their willingness to elevate the profit motive and work with very dodgy organisations is a terrible sign, even at this fairly early stage. So there's a major red flag. I think, though, that the doom and gloom it's going to destroy us all side of things is exaggerated. I think we would be seeing more coherent bad action from AI actors by now, if that was going to be a major threat. Mind you, I'm not an expert in this area, but that's my feeling. I do think that some of the bad stuff would really be emerging, whereas most of the bad stuff now is accidental. It's either accidental in forms of hallucinations, or it's just terrible advice, or it's people knowingly using this tool to terrible purposes, rather than a function of the AI doing it itself. So I'm relatively optimistic in those terms. It is rather a shame that the things that AI is mostly used for are things that should be creative and done by humans. So music, image generation, etc., etc. I do think that is quite an early downside. But I also think that the uniqueness and humanity of some of these artisan areas will become more appreciated over time as well. There will be a swing of the pendulum back towards the other side eventually. Possibly, especially if there's significant enshittification.
Yeah. So, unenshittification. Maybe. What can we do to beautify the future then? What are you most optimistic about?
People remaining people. I think that, yes, through thousands and thousands of years, if you look at the kinds of poetry people wrote back in Chinese dynasties, in ancient cultures, people are people. I think people will remain people. So, yes, I am optimistic about that. I think that the gestalt of all sorts of things that is a human being and all it means and what it is to be one will remain essentially itself.
That's interesting. It's interesting to think about, yeah, what it is to be a human being. I mean, I often wonder about that in the sense of, a deep history point of view. I look at how my ancestors lived. Well, I've never been there. I can't sample their psychology and just put it in my head. But we've got all sorts of art. We got the writings, the old poetry. There are some similarities. Some of the the timeless struggles that we have as humans. But
and every single generation, way back in the Romans, are saying the young people today, they're going to hell.
Yes,
exactly.
The old finger wagging, yeah.
Timeless.
That's so interesting, yeah. But I mean, there's always been a want of more time and more freedom, right? I mean, the reasons why agrarian civilization started apparently was because they thought they could automate or make it easier to get food, freeing them up to be able to do more things. People argue, have more leisure time. But it just caused people to generate more products. There was a lot of diseases around that sort of manifest in highly static, highly populated areas.
Very true. Yes. Very true.
And
also, once you have a resource that is storable, you have a resource that can be stolen.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah, and tribes got massive, bigger and bigger, from just small tribes where everybody knew each other to hamlets, to towns, to villages, to cities, to empires. And, you could walk down the street and not know anybody, and suddenly you treat most people that you see in the world as cardboard cutouts. Yeah. But the being human in the modern world is different, I think.
Yes, and I think it's very important to create those smaller tribes around yourself to remain human.
Yeah. All right. Well, Lev, have you got any other questions, or Lydia? Well, do you have any concluding remarks that you think is the most important, or some important things to take away? Well, actually, pause that question unless Lev's got one.
Yeah.
Do you have any for this point? Yeah. So maybe we can ask you just to, if you've got any concluding sort of remarks that you'd like to.
As I said, I'm in general on the optimistic side about the effects of AI. I'm certainly not a doom laden prophet in that particular area. But I think that it's absolutely critically important to remain aware of the pitfalls, and particularly at the individual level for people who might be especially vulnerable, to make sure that where AI is used therapeutically or as a triage or a front door service, that is done in ways that balance the risks with the benefits. And that is an area where we should be advocating for government oversight. It really, really is. I'm sure many people here are already quite aware of that, but it's not going to happen by itself. These systems, if they're allowed to grow, will end up skewed, stunted, and with all sorts of abnormal tumours on them. Just to go with what I've got as my visual image there. So being aware of the risks without being doom-laden about them is probably what I would like us to take away from this.
Fantastic. Really appreciate your time and attention to these issues, Angela.
I really loved being asked to do this talk. It was a great topic to think about and work something up on. Yeah,
I haven't seen a whole lot of stuff out there addressing this topic by psychiatrists. There is one that I know of, and he's quite prolific, and that's Scott Alexander, of course.
Oh, yes,
but,
yes. I know Scott.
There's not a lot that I've seen. It's great that, he's quite a private person. He doesn't give talks. He writes a lot. He's very prolific in his writing. So it's really good to hear somebody talk about this and have a face to put to the issues.
A human.
Yes, exactly right. So thank you so much for joining us and participating and providing your energy.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Yes, yes. And you too, Liv. I didn't get to say that because we had to fast transition. But yeah, really appreciate your participation and willingness to sort of give up your time and energy to be able to do all this.
Oh, look, you know, thank you for inviting me. I didn't get around to sort of like spending the time that I was initially planning to spend on the role of AI and all this. But, you know, it's kind of like a pre-AI foundation. There's not much you can, you know, if your environment burns, all other cards are off the table.
Yeah, he's coming to save you there.
Unless we have this like Terminator-like landscape, you know, where the robots are just like marching around a desolate, burnt-out husk of a planet.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. And it's future day. There's many things to think about with regard to the future, and they don't all have to be about AI.
Oh,
so
you did bring up actually on discussion earlier about data centres.
Yes.
Data centres and resource usage. Very quickly, I will point out that over 70% of greenhouse gas emissions that occur through IT equipment is actually personal devices.
Oh, really?
Whether it's like whether it's business desktops, laptops, you know, handheld devices, what have you.
I'm glad to hear that. That's fairly reassuring.
The big data centers look scary, but they actually are, relatively efficient.
Right.
Good. Thank you.
That's interesting.
Again, a scaling issue. It's the way the brain works, you know.
Yeah. Do you think data centers will become more efficient in the future? Or is there better?
Oh yeah. They work quite hard at that actually.
Right. But there's cheap ways of getting powering data centers, which are very good for fast scale up, which I'm worried about. They build a new gas plant next to a data center just because it's just cheaper to build your own
But of course, data centers want to be close to where the information transfer is because of latency costs.
Yes.
And throughput costs. So actually one of the curious things that is becoming more popular in the US for like the data centers is actually this like looking towards nuclear. So actually given the sustained electricity supply in relative proximity to population centers.
I must say there seems to be a episode of The Simpsons waiting for that one.
Yeah, there probably is one.
We got to create a nice Dyson sphere and beam the energy in, right?